Okay, I think we're live. This is maiden voyage of CUB live stream. I think we end up doing this more than a couple times. I'm gonna have to come up with a name for it, CUB lunch or something like that. But what's up, everybody? I'm Corey Singletary with the Citizens Utility Board, and I've got with me here today Tom Content, our executive director.
Hey, Corey.
How's it going?
Good.
So we were sitting around talking, and we thought that it might be good to, I don't know, we spent a lot of time thinking about what's coming up in 2021 and the kind of work that we might be doing, and everything that's going on, and within the context of everything that's going on in the world. And we're like, maybe folks might be interested in seeing what's coming down the pipe, not only just for CUB but for utilities and others. So, I mean, sitting here today looking at, in January, it's very nearly February now. Um, what's 2021 look like? I mean, what's the biggest thing that jumps out to you first off when we're looking at, the year going into it?
Well, here we are. We're in our basements. And why are we in our basement offices, right? It's the pandemic. We're all staying safe, and as we hope everybody is trying to stay safe and protect themselves. And so our office is remote. Many offices are remote, but the pandemic and the impact of that is really foremost on what we're focused on, because it's affected utility customers in so many ways. We were involved last year with the cases where the PSC was contemplating whether to allow shutoffs of customers to continue, and they decided, well, in the summer they said, well, if we allow shutoffs to resume, then there would be no cooling centers for people to go to, and every time they got close to thinking about allowing shutoffs to resume, the case numbers in Wisconsin got worse, and they ended up extending it all the way essentially to the winter moratorium to April 15th. And now we're watching to see what happens with Congress. Congress did the CARES Act, and then they did another bill in December that includes some money for utility arrears to help with some of the financial challenge this has caused. But it looks like more is going to be needed to help with this. So that's I think we got to stay focused on the pandemic first and foremost. When you think about the pandemic, Corey, and what we've been doing, it's like what's the lane you see for us?
Well, I mean, certainly one of the challenges with the pandemic is, there's the day in and day out stuff that we all have to live through. But, in terms of our little world that we work in, it really comes down to the impact that the pandemic has had on people's ability to pay for their utility service, the essential electric, water, natural gas services that everyone needs. And it's great that the commission was able to extend the disconnection moratorium until April 15th. But one of the things that we've communicated, where we as an organization have tried to communicate it throughout, is, if you can't pay your bills, I mean, this will give you some reprieve. There are a lot of resources to try to tap into in terms of bill assistance and whatnot. And I think from our perspective, with what the commission has already done, I think it's some of what we're doing right here is trying to do some outreach and trying to raise awareness of, okay, well, maybe your utility has sent you something that said that you're not going to be disconnected, or maybe you read in the news that you're not going to be disconnected from or residential customers anyway, you're not going to be disconnected from your utility service until April. But if you have an ability to pay, engage with your utilities. If you have some ability to start maybe now paying some of back balance that you have with the utility, to reach out to them and try to start working something out. Because what we would hate to see is, the spring roll around, more and more people get vaccinated. We start have some form of economic recovery by that point. and the commission determines that the disconnection moratorium is no longer needed, and then folks get to that April 15th deadline, and all of a sudden all these disconnection notices start rolling out and people start getting disconnected from the utility service. So I think from my end, it's something that, at least in my career, I haven't done a ton of, which is actually, go talk to utility customers. But that would be something I would emphasize is certainly if you can't, you can't pay, then you can't pay right now. But if you have the ability to, the disconnection moratorium is not a free pass. It's not, just wiping out your utility bills and you're not going to have to pay it. The bill's going to have to come due at some point, and start now if you can, to minimize the pain later. And we've, in our conversations that we both have had with our counterparts at the various utilities, one of the things we've heard from all of them is, they absolutely want to hear. They want to hear from their customers in terms of starting that conversation or trying to work out a path to getting them back to their account being without a back balance on it, to be up on that. So I think that's the big one. Hopefully just the broader circumstance, we can get out of this pandemic soon and we can get back to normal stuff, and we don't have to be working out of our basements anymore.
That would be good. That would be good. Yeah. And so CUB is signing on to some letters nationally, trying to see if Congress can add some LIHEAP funding for the Low Income Energy Assistance Program for energy. And what was interesting to see come out of Congress in December was the fact that they actually included low income assistance for water utility customers. There's been a LIHEAP program for decades, but this is the first time ever that as a national policy they've allowed set aside a certain amount of money, hundreds of millions, I think, but across the country for water, specifically for low-income water utility customers. So we're hopeful that there can be more that can be done there, just because there are a lot of people in dire straits, and one of the challenges is trying to make sure that everybody who needs the money is aware that it's out there and available.
Yeah, I think the awareness. One of the things that strikes me, looking back at my own personal lived experiences, there was a point in time, took some time off from college, and I really didn't have any money, and I ended up in sort of I ended up in that sort of classic, like, do I pay my utility bill or do I buy groceries sort of situation for many months, and I wasn't aware that there was sort of income-based utility assistance, and I think that a concern I have is, even this deep into the pandemic, even this deep into how hard some folks have been hit by this, is that folks may not be aware of what resources are available in terms of state utility assistance, LIHEAP, things of that nature. Folks who unfortunately maybe live in that sort of economic strata more regularly probably have more familiarity, but I think the pandemic has brought a lot of people into contact with bill hardship that maybe haven't in the past, where jobs have dried up in industries that have historically been fairly protected, and over the last year, shocking to say that over the past year with the pandemic, it's been a long time, that there may be folks where this is new territory. So yeah, that's certainly where I know that for folks that are really into the wonky stuff, like we have to be, the utilities they provided some information to the commission a couple of weeks ago, sort of outlining where they're at in terms of the number of customers that are behind on their bills and the amount that's owed, and all of the expenses the utilities have incurred related to COVID in terms of continuing to provide service that are COVID specific. And those are going to come up, which sort of naturally leads itself into probably the big thing that we were looking at this year is, I guess our sort of bread and butter work is rate cases, and we're looking at kind of an interesting year coming up in terms of utility rate cases.
Yeah, it's been a long time. It's been a long time since since CUB, and certainly you and I have been here around at CUB since 2017, but it's been since at least the early 2000s, since all five of our major investor-owned utilities were in front of the PSC with a rate increase. We've had this system where the utilities generally coming in every other year, and with five, you end up with three cases one year or two another. But the pandemic changed that too. So with the rate decisions for MG&E, the settlement that CUB and others negotiated last year, and then the Alliant Wisconsin Power and Light case, both were one-year cases, and so both are expected to be filing, and then Excel also, and the two WEC Energy Group utilities, We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service. It's quite a rundown.
Yeah, and it's I mean it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. I mean, one, that just just personally from our perspective, it's a workload consideration, right? Is normally even if all the stars align in terms of resources, dealing with, like, say, three utility rate cases in one year can be a huge heavy lift. But the potential of having all five and all of the unique issues and things that you have to look at with each one of them, because it's not cookie cutter. It's not like you do one rate case, you've done them all. And the challenges that kind of comes with that is tricky.
Yeah, three cases in a year is like a bear, and I guess this is like a pack of bears, or
yeah, bears are not normally pack animals, but they're kind of ganging up on us here.
And they are.
And I mean, do you think that some of the experience last year with the utilities that we worked with that had settlements or cases that were sort of like settlements, like that, for example, the MG&E case, do you think that the experience there in terms of for folks who aren't familiar, like MG&E kind of came in the door and said, well, we have under normal circumstances, we would have a deficiency. We would need to increase rates. And most of that was due to the impact that COVID was having on the utility business, in terms of there was way less commercial industrial load, fewer sales, much less usage, which meant that some of those fixed utility costs or various utility costs that would otherwise be covered by that revenue wasn't, and it had to be made up someplace. And we were able to come to a settlement with the utility that sort of held rates flat for electric and try to manage things on gas. But that experience of COVID having an impact on putting utilities in a situation where they might have to raise rates, do you think that's something that we're going to see going into this year, or with the five?
That's the concern. I mean, it's hard to predict, but one concern is that the economic impact of this is still continuing, and obviously the pandemic is still continuing, and we've got new strains of the virus that are more transmissible that are now new, fresh concerns for folks. So I think it's going to be. I hope we could see a replay where we can get to the point where any increases can be managed and cut back to zero. But that's always the challenge, and it's a tough time to be coming in and asking to raise rates, right? I mean, folks are struggling it's hard to pay the mortgage or the rent for a lot of folks. So that's going to be the onus is going to be on them to really come forward with proposals that aren't asking for the stars and the moon.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be a tough road to hoe for any of the utilities coming in during, I'm hoping, crossing all the fingers and toes, that we're in the sort of third act of the pandemic, but that may not be the case. But it's kind of a tough sell that the utilities are going to have to make to the commission that, hey, and we need a 3% increase, a 5% increase, whatever it might be, 10, we at this point, we don't know. We're just starting to hear from our utility counterparts that they'd like to start talking about what they're looking at for 2022 rates. And I guess we'll see. This,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think one thing just to catch people up is, we had some information in our most recent newsletter on this, but the rates have generally leveled off in Wisconsin over the last 4 or 5 years. And so we've been pleased with that. Certainly, the utilities were able to allocate some savings through the corporate tax cuts that ended up helping levelize things and prevent increases. But a lot of that is tax dollars. There are no more tax dollars to give to return to customers at this point, or very, very few at this moment. So lingering from that, and so the challenge is that over time, if you take it back over time, our rates have still gone up faster than inflation. If you go back to kind of the before the last big investment in new generation from the utilities, so that our rates have gone up faster than inflation over a much longer period of time. But so that's still a challenge. And then our competitive position in the Midwest is still a challenge when it comes to electricity rates. The second, generally, using the EIA data that we look at pretty regularly, another acronym there, Energy Information Administration. We've been, for residential customers, we're 13th highest in the country and second highest in the Midwest after Michigan. So it's against this backdrop that we're always, bracing to see what the utilities are coming forward with for the next few years. And at some point, we'd like to encourage the utilities and the PSC to get, for if no other reason than for a workload, to get back to the every other year, 2 1 year, 3 another kind of a pattern.
Yeah, I mean, that getting back to that cycle would be, great. The thing that I think about when facing the potential of 5 utility rate cases in 1 year, is it really comes down to resources, right? And for those who don't know, it's it's stuff like what we're probably going to be starting soon, which is sort of these preliminary talks with utilities where they, it varies. Sometimes it's more of a dump of like, hey, this is what we're going to do, just FYI, to other utilities and other circumstances being more of an engaged conversation where we're talking about substance and we're talking about, potential pathways forward leading into an actual ultimate filing, an actual application with all the data and whatnot that they have to provide to the commission. There's all that work, and then right before tax time, the utilities are typically rolling in with their applications and all this information, and that process kicks off in April and then rolls through the summer, and then the sort of the stuff that people usually see really starts in earnest at the end of summer with testimony and filings, then ultimately a hearing, and then the commission's decision somewhere in November. So it's, very nearly 3/4 of the year is tied up in these cases.
Right.
And, from right now, where we're at as an organization, CUB's always been a small shop. For most of its, I think my understanding is the entirety of our existence. But right now it's, you and me and Rich. We get a little bit of pinch hitting from our former executive director and general counsel, Kurt Runzler. He, kicks us some ideas and thoughts from time to time, but he's busy kind of sailing off into the sunset with retirement. Resources is a constraint. So, one of the things that we worked on last year that was sort of under the radar, I know we threw it out there in a couple of newsletters, but we've been trying to work on addressing that resource constraint. I was wondering, if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of how that's going.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a big issue. The CUB has always relied a lot on um, outside consultants in rate cases to help provide expertise to go up against the utilities. So when the legislature created CUB in 1979, it was the legislators at the time said, "Oh, there's not a level playing field between the utilities on the one side and the customers on the other." And utilities have all these consultants and attorneys and lobbyists or whatever that a big group that they can bring to bear in every case. And even with having created CUB is always sort of we represent the small customers, and we're kind of the little guy in the cases too. We have currently, as you said, a staff of 3, and what's changed in recent years that's kind of pushing a change for how we hope we can do our work going forward is the legislature passed that settlements law a couple years ago, which is encouraging organizations like CUB to negotiate across the table from the utilities rather than just arguing through briefs and testimony and filings. So if it's more of a if it's more of a negotiation, then what we've explained to the utilities and to the legislature is then CUB needs to be able to have more folks like Corey, who has expertise in this area and is experienced testifying in utility cases, that we can have an ongoing relationship and have informed utility insight across the negotiating table from the utilities as utilities try to do what the legislatures ask them to do. The legislatures encouraging them to negotiate rather than litigate. And so the end result of our thought process on this was a proposal that was included in a PSC omnibus bill that got widespread support in the last session from the business community, from the utilities, and got unanimous votes in both the legislature's utilities committees, and actually did pass the assembly too on a voice vote. So 3 unanimous votes out of the 4 that were needed to get it over the finish line. So felt like we got it down to the 5-yard line or the 3-yard line, and then we had a little red zone challenge at the end there, which the Senate was slated to consider this in March 2020, obviously, and the safer at home and kind of coronavirus lockdowns started in March, and the Senate opted not to convene then, and that's the reason. It was never able to get scheduled. The traditional end of the legislative session is April 1 in the even numbered years, so that they could there were possibilities that they could reconvene, but we're looking forward to that bill is being reintroduced. The plan is to reintroduce that, and we're looking forward to seeing it move forward in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, I mean, it's because what you're talking about in terms of bringing folks in house, like myself or anyone else, having an attorney. Sorry, my phone was blowing up because my wife was texting me, and she's like the one person where even if I mute my phone, like, because I need to know, like, if I need to go pick up the kid or something, like, it has to go off. But all that costs money, and I think what a lot of folks don't maybe know or appreciate is so in Wisconsin, well, just generally, looking at how this business works is, like you described, you have the utilities, and they've got all of their in-house expertise, in-house counsel. They will contract with external experts if they need to, outside counsel and whatnot, and they have all the money and the resources they do that. And those regulatory expenses are recovered from ratepayers in terms of that flow of cash. And in most arenas, you've got the utility kind of presenting their side, and the commissioner is sort of the adjudicator, making the decisions. And then someone has to speak for the various customer groups. Residential customers, small commercial customers, large industrial customers, customers who have an interest in renewable energy, customers who have an interest in, I don't know, sand mines or banana forestry or whatever. And so you have parties that will then advocate for various groups or positions. And in most states, there is an Office of Consumer Advocate or something like that exists and as some part of state governmental function that does that is the advocate for the consumer. Sometimes it's for all utility customers, and a lot of times that consumer advocate is just for residential customers or residential and small business customers like we do. And in Wisconsin, we don't have that. The structure we have, by virtue of, like you talked about, the legislature creating CUB back in the 70s, is we have an independent organization, so not a state agency, not part of the commission, which is, on paper, great, right? Because we can sort of take a step back and think about, well, what's the best, what is in the best interest of customers without having to be concerned too much about, the politics or whatnot. So on paper, that's great. It's only us in Oregon, right, that have that kind of model.
That's right. Just 2 states out in the whole country that have that model with with only the nonprofit group CUB advocating. There are other states that have CUBs. We have seen a mini resurgence in creation of new CUBs in the last few years, and most recently in Ohio, but also in Michigan and Minnesota. But as an example, in the Midwest, you have multiple states near Wisconsin that have both a CUB and a state attorney general's office or Office of Consumer Advocate that are doing this, that are advocating on behalf of the residential customers and or the small business customers.
Yeah.
And for small businesses in Wisconsin and residential homeowners, renters, you name it, in Wisconsin, it's you and me and Rich.
Yeah, and so there's that organizational part, but part of the challenge that we've always faced here in this state, and we've done, as an organization, CUB has done great, and we've got some stats up on our website in terms of how much money that we've been able to contribute to saving customers over the years and whatnot, and it's a lot. But we have an office of 3 right now, and our budget, compared to all the other offices, all the other consumer advocate offices across the country, if you consider the sort of meat and potatoes, dollars and cents, what impacts customer rates, sort of non-issue advocate organizations, ratepayer advocate organizations, we're basically at the bottom, right? In terms of how much money we had. I mean, even if you look at the Midwest, we have the least resources, in terms of certainty, in terms of what we would have on a regular basis, compared to any of our counterparts in the Midwest, or even Oregon with that nonprofit model. They have their own sort of, my understanding is they have their own sort of deal that they've got set out there, but that provides them certainty to be able to hire, to be able to have staff on hand, to be able to have a number of people in-house to do the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, they have attorneys and economists and et cetera.
Yeah. So that's something, I don't think that the funding bill that is currently before the legislature will get us all the way there, but I think it's a good first start. Wouldn't you think, maybe?
Yeah, I think it gets us to what we think will be an adequate for what we need right now. I think we need. It doesn't even get us to. I think if I remember the numbers right, we'd still be below the other Midwest states in terms of the what funding level that would be coming to the Consumer Advocate Office, even if this were to, even once this passes. So it's not like I said a little while ago, we didn't want the utilities asking for the stars and the moon, and we're certainly not doing that either.
No.
I think for a typical customer, it's 18 cents a year, a couple less than 2 pennies on a typical monthly bill that would be coming from the utility customers or the electric utility customers in that example. So but it would give us the ability to obviously have the full-time staff attorney that is indispensable is indispensable, and something that we haven't had now for going on 2 years almost, and also enable us to have more ability to bring more analyst expertise into the shop, into the fold.
Yeah, I mean that would be great. From my perspective, even just personally, just having a few more bodies around the office, or virtual office as we kind of exist in right now.
Yeah,
That's huge.
whether in a virtual space or an actual workplace, it's two heads are better than one, but five heads are better than three too.
Yeah, and one of the things you touched on, so before I worked at CUB, I worked at the commission for 7 years, on staff, as part of the technical staff there. And one of the things that I found and believe, and most people do believe, is hugely important in this weird universe that we operate in, is sort of institutional memory. Right, because the business we do, we talked about rate cases, but the business we do does tend to run on these long cycles, right? There's always work before the commission, but rates get reviewed under normal circumstances every couple of years. Construction projects for new infrastructure, because utility investments tend to be very long-lived, there's always something that's kind of rolling through, but big stuff like power plants or solar facilities, or in the future battery storage, those come along, maybe 2-3 times a generation. And, one of the most valuable things that I was able to tap into when I was on commission staff was people who had worked for the agency for decades, and remembered, exactly which docket 30 years ago they talked about, or the commission addressed a specific issue, and what the decision was and what the specifics were. And that carries over to all the other parties too. And I think that one of the things that I hope that we'll be able to build is that sort of institutional memory and internal institutional capacity where, as folks come and go through our office, that we'll be able to preserve that. And we'll not only just the relationships with the utilities, but that knowledge of, does someone remember the last time we addressed this issue? And because that makes that's key.
That's a really good point. I mean, because we have your years of experience at the commission, and I only have a couple of years at CUB, but I at least knew what the utilities were doing from having reported on this area for the Journal Sentinel and before that the Press Gazette since into the late 90s. I think around the late 90s when I started covering Wisconsin Public Service, back when they were still talking deregulation and restructuring. So, but again, keeping that institution, I think that you raise a good point that the utilities have certain people who are doing this year in and year out, and CUB needs to have the customer side needs to have that as well. That's critical.
Because I think that's one of the things that when we had the conversations last year with folks at the legislature and the commission and other places with the utilities, about about getting something like our funding proposal, passed, and that sort of modernization of consumer advocate funding in the state, was that we need to have that internal capacity, because it's not just enough to say, okay, well, does CUB have access to a pot of money that would allow us to go out and hire outside experts?
Right.
Because we do. I mean, one could argue that we do. There's an intervener compensation fund. It's several $100,000s. And, on an ad hoc basis, we could ask the commission for that money, but it doesn't allow us even, if a utility proposes something before the commission, if we don't have sort of that institutional capacity to even just look at it and say, yeah, we need to hire someone to look at this more because we can't, we don't have that expertise in house. If people don't have that sort of history and understanding, you can't even make that upfront determination that you do need help. It's sort of
Right.
at that point, you don't know what you don't know. And or at least this way, at the worst case scenario, if we had some additional folks in house and maybe they bring some experience with them or they develop it over time, is at a minimum we can better identify what are the important issues that are coming at us and are coming at the ratepayer,
Right.
to be able to better address them.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a risk to the average citizen if the consumer advocate is a position of you don't know what you don't know, and so issues that might be significant costs or significant costs that there is an alternative point of view from what the utilities are presenting, but if we don't even have if nobody is at the consumer advocate has an ability to assess that, it's the ratepayers who lose. So this is all setting the stage for a much more effective CUB.
Yeah. So one of the things that mostly I've been working on, and it's been a matter of trying to fit it in. So speaking of freeing up of having more bodies around the office to do the work, trying to fit it in is when we both started at CUB years ago. Years ago now, it's like dog years. It feels like it was yesterday. That we talked about was trying to expand beyond just the sort of wonky regulatory work that has historically been the meat and potatoes of CUB for maybe probably the last couple of decades, and really trying to re-engage with customers more directly to make certain that people are informed, make certain that people are aware of their options, make certain people are just aware of what's going on. Are they aware that their utility has filed for an increase in rates, or they're
Right.
proposing to build some sort of widget or what's it or who's it or whatever? And so, what people are watching right now, I'm actually looking. I'm genuinely surprised, and folks can drop something in the chat if they have any questions or anything. But there are actually 4 people that are watching right now, which is, for a maiden voyage of just completely stumbling through a live stream, is
We're on
pretty
our way.
amazing. We're on our way. Yeah, well, 4 people today, 10,000 tomorrow. But we started our YouTube channel to try to as part of that effort to more directly interface with customers, and certainly next week, Monday or Tuesday, we'll be dropping a video on some really riveting information on how to navigate the utilities or the commission's regulatory filing system to find stuff that people might be interested in. But do you have any other thoughts, or what kind of comes to mind in terms of other ways that folks can get engaged, or we could help them get engaged in this utility area?
Yeah, no, I think we're gonna try to have more content available that helps, like you said, helps people understand how the process works and what's going on. And one thing that we did more of pre-COVID is, talk to community groups, talk to Rotaries, speak at the energy fairs. We piloted some utility bill clinics in partnership with Outpost Natural Foods in Milwaukee and at some other locations where we can, walk through how to save on your energy bill, what to look for. And we'd encourage folks to reach out to us. We would like to convert that to a more virtual offering during the pandemic, but that's just doesn't happen like that, lickety split. But I think that's something we'd like to do more of. And obviously, CUB's its main work is the wonky stuff at the commission, but we also have it in our mission to educate the customers, and that's on the value of energy efficiency and saving on your energy bills and steps you can take. So I think we want to keep doing that in whatever formats, in multiple formats, whether it's for a residential or small business. I think during the pandemic, we still did. I think I did we did a virtual bill clinic last summer, and then we ended up doing some talks with some We Energies customers at one of the Milwaukee area Rotary clubs. So it can happen. People are zooming, so we welcome more opportunities to do that for neighborhood groups, community groups, chambers, Rotaries, you name it.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly recognizing that, with just this, we're doing a live stream right now, but most of the people who are going to see this are going to, see it on a replay. Is if
Yeah,
people have any thoughts as to, how we might be able to, be a resource for residential, small business, farm customers, the folks that are our constituency, whether they're whether they're a donating CUB, member or not, we
right.
represent all of those folks, regardless. How, provide a comment, drop a comment here in this video or send us an email or whatnot. Phone is a little bit more iffy because there are days when our phone system doesn't forward my calls to my phone, but, get in touch with
Let's
us.
run into that issue.
Yeah. Email us, and if folks have ideas as to how we can be a resource, I think that would be really helpful, because there are certainly days when this isn't the only thing, but there are certainly days when we end up in a situation where it's like, well, we think this is what people need, but is it the exact form, or is
Right.
that really what a resource that people need to better help them? But when I was putting together ideas for content for the YouTube channel, for example, I was like, initially, I mean, you remember the first few videos were these very detailed sort of weekly rundowns of all the stuff that had happened the previous week. And I'm sitting here with this script of all this stuff I got to rattle off and remember and whatnot. And most of it is probably not of interest to most people most of the time, because, everyone only has one electric utility, one natural gas utility. In most cases, they're the same company.
Right.
They have a water. Most of the time, most folks will have a water utility.
Right.
And that's kind of what people are really interested in. The only thing they're interested in is essentially what affects them. They don't really care if, the Kaukauna Municipal Electric Utility filed for an application to expand their hydro facility or something like that. No one, not other than people who live in Kaukauna, no one cares about that. So, it occurred to me, it's like, well, what's the old saying? If you what is it? You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach them the fish, you feed him for the rest of their life, or something business like that. And some of it, one of the things we've talked about in the past is trying to empower customers to be more informed and also be more engaged. And so as boring as it probably sounds, and it might not be super sexy for people, I would encourage folks to check in and watch those. This is going to be a series of videos because it's a lot of not junk. It's a lot of stuff to cover, but to find out about how to look up what their utilities are doing, or if they got a bill insert that says, hey, they filed for a rate increase. How do I go find out more information if they want? And it's things like that, and trying to teach folks how they can then get and be engaged. Because you and I both have had conversations with folks where they've seen in the newspaper, hey, I just saw this issue.
Right.
What can I do? And I'm like, well, you can file comments. There's a bunch of paths that people can go down, and
Exactly.
there's a lot of situation where folks just don't know what they don't know, and my thought is that we can try to help bridge that information gap.
Right. And and our website does have resources on things related to some of the topics we've been talking about, whether that's the saving, consumer focused, saving on your energy bills, some energy saving information. A lot of that does refer right to Focus on Energy, because they're the go-to place for energy efficiency in Wisconsin. But also we have a scams guide, protecting yourself against scams by folks that are posing as utility representatives and trying to bilk you out of your hard-earned money. and then some COVID resources too. And we're waiting to see what happens through the Department of Administration on this recent COVID legislation that allocated $25 billion nationally for rental and utility arrears assistance. And I think DOA is still formulating its plans, but once that's up and running, we're going to have an updated links to on our COVID resources page as well, link to all this. So yeah, between YouTube, the website, and everything, but shouting with megaphones, we're going to try to be there to answer your questions, whether it's virtually and at some point in person again.
Yeah, and admittedly, it's one of the challenges has always been no one really thinks about their utilities until they think about the utilities once a month, right? When the bill shows up,
Right.
or when the bill is due. And then maybe in a grander sense, once a year or once every 3 years, when they see in the paper or they get something in their a bill insert that says that rates might be going up. And it's how do you get people interested in and I guess excited about something that is inherently not exciting 364 days of the year. And that's something that, and it's something that admittedly a lot of folks probably find difficult to see, for lack of a better term, positive, something positive out of, other than just, hey, this is some place where I need to where I need to send money. But yeah, I think along, all those avenues are going to be trying to look to engage with more folks. Is there, we talked about a lot of stuff, and you and I both need to jump on a different call with
Pretty soon.
with some other folks pretty soon. Is there anything else like looking forward to the rest of 2021? As we sit here in January, end of January, nearly February, recognizing that everything could be different in 2 months, and it could be everything we say today could be completely wrong. Is there anything in particular that also jumps out at you that is probably coming down the road?
Well, you can't not talk about the clean energy transition, because that's it's the talk of it's everywhere. It's in Washington, but before it was in Washington, it was here with the utilities and with the Evers administration. So every utility has a carbon goal of getting toward net neutrality on carbon. The Evers administration has the same goal, and so that it permeates a lot of the conversations we're having with stakeholders, with utilities, with everybody. But so that right now, for instance, we're a part of a stakeholder advisory group on the clean energy plan that's being developed by the Evers folks. But then those conversations come up in the rate cases as well, and the key is what CUB's goal in all this is just we know the clean energy transition is happening. It's solar costs have come down so much. It's been surprising and refreshing and a really good thing for customers to see those reductions. But that doesn't mean there aren't other steps we can't take to make this transition as more affordable for customers. And
Yeah,
so
because
that's a key issue.
Yeah, because the key part of that is the transition part, right?
Right.
Is the utilities are not just proposing that they construct a new solar farm, for example. They're also proposing just in abstract. I'm not talking about any one particular utility, but they're, we've seen with actually specific utilities like We Energies closing down the Pleasant Prairie Power Plant early. Alliant Energy has essentially announced that they will be shutting down Edgewater
in
Sheboygan, early. And it's that transition from the old generating facilities, most of which are fossil fuel, to the new stuff, but on a timetable that is earlier than when all that old generation was initially planned to go out. So if you think about it from the standpoint of, paying off the costs, utility utility assets and investments are a little different from, say, a car, where maybe you buy a car and you pay it off over 5 years, but you intend to own it for 15 or 20 years or whatnot until the wheels fall off.
Right.
Like my first car, my Honda Civic. And with utility investments like a power plant, essentially the utility is paying that off. The customers are paying for that over the useful life of that. That's typically the upfront plan, right? So if it's a 30-year useful life of the facility, that's the depreciable life of the facility. And then so accounting, the way that's done in terms of an accounting treatment perspective is it's paid off over 30 years.
Right.
So if you shut a plant down early, that means that there are essentially payments on that were planned for, but now the facility is not operating anymore. And so you're bringing in all this new investment while essentially your initial loan on the old stuff still has to be paid off. It's not like a car in the sense that if you replace your SUV with a Tesla, that you can sell the old car and recoup some value, or at least try to release yourself from that debt and then move into the new vehicle. You're stuck in the utility arena to some degree, paying for both.
2 cars.
Yeah, you're still paying for 2 cars, even though you only have one.
Right.
And that's the challenge is, at CUB, we're not a renewable organization. So we are technology agnostic. We honestly don't care. It's sort of our job to be primarily focused on, the bill impacts for customers. We're certainly aware of the environmental benefits, and, you and I both certainly have personal feelings about renewable energy and whatnot. But when the lens that we have to look through as the consumer advocate is, what does this do to folks' ability to afford their utility bill? And that's an ongoing conversation. We've had that with utility. We've talked with the utilities about, to get into wonky terms, talking about things like used and useful, and, should you be earning full profit or full return on something that doesn't exist anymore?
Well, yeah, and you brought up Pleasant Prairie, and so that gives us a chance to just mention that was a good victory for customers. That we were pretty vocal when that plant shut down about the concerns of having to continue to pay for dozens or more years on that, and so in the rate settlement that we negotiated and with others in We Energies in 2019. We Energies committed to refinance a portion of the cost of that to a lower rate through the state's environmental trust financing law. And so then last year, 2020, We Energies did submit that that proposal, and it got approved toward the end of the year. And savings, I think, savings over time are north of $85 million for We Energies customers. So a good to see that outcome on one retired coal plant, but there are other fossil plants that are coming. And if you look at the long view, we had all this investment in fossil generation, whether it's building new plants or keeping older plants going. And Corey was talking about, you were talking about the long cycles of these things. And one of the messages that the public was getting over time years ago was, well, we have this building cycle now, so our rates are going up, but then we're going to have a break from the building cycle, and the other states are going to catch up.
I remember that,
so,
yeah.
You remember that, right? So we went from how Tommy Thompson used to brag, when he was governor, the lowest rates in the Midwest. Come to Wisconsin in his own, with a little shtick and his salesman appeal. Mm-hmm. But that building cycle contributed to the fact that now we're the second highest. And so the challenge from the consumer advocate point of view is, here we are now with another building cycle upon us, or we're already in it.
Yeah.
And so managing those costs of the plants that utilities say, hey, these are no longer needed to keep the lights on because we'd rather have this. mostly solar, is what we're seeing. That's is kind of front and center from a big picture of what we're focused on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's tricky, and I'm sure we'll see some of that pop up in some of the filings we'll have to deal with this year. But
yeah, it's a big one, but yeah, it keeps us happy.
well, we should probably do this more often. Maybe we'll make it a weekly thing, and we probably won't make it won't make it an hour every time. But maybe Tom and I will talk, and maybe we'll do this maybe once a week or something as a little,
We'll do
CUB
this a little
lunch
more
chat.
regularly. Yeah.
Which is it's a lot easier when I don't know which would be easier, if we were doing it live in the office with the two of us, or if this is actually easier with it being virtual, because we can just do it whenever. But we'll look at maybe doing some more of this, because I think just being able to just chat about this stuff is great. And it can be more topical than it can be like, well, we were just talking with someone an hour ago about X, and we can just kind of riff on that. But you and I both need to jump on another call. So for folks that did manage, I think there are 3 folks that managed to hang out with us through.
Thank you very much.
Through this whole stream, and if you have any comments, feel free to drop them in there or shoot us an email. And otherwise, we'll look to see you in the next video. And yeah, everyone take care. All right. Bye.
Take care.